Okay. So again, this is an Ariba webinar. We've been doing these for a couple of years now. You know, it's presented by the Best Practice Center, or BPC, at Ariba here. And my name is Peter Kosovec. I work in the Best Practice Center at Ariba. And we'll talk about a little bit later on, you know, what does our department really do and what do we do for customers. But basically, we present these. They're sponsored by our CEE, or the account management organization at Ariba. And we started to do this. They were well received a couple years ago. A lot of customers like it because it's free and it's good knowledge to get out there. And we record these sessions as well. And I'll talk about later where you can access the recordings to of the previous webinars as well as today. Okay, so today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about what is a contract request. More specifically, you know, we're going to talk about, you know, why would you use it if your organization, why would it be of interest to you? You know, how do you create it? We'll be talking about, you know, what permissions do you need to create a contract request? How does it work? Some configuration options as well. Hopefully this will give you clarity on what it is and how to use it and why you would use it. So what is a request? So in the contracts world, a lot of customers, prior to using a request in a contract management system, are typically using sort of email as a request process. So for example, I've seen a lot of customers, you know, where they have either some sort of Word contract request form or something, or it could be Excel or Word, and as well as just frankly email. So they're either attaching that form to the email, or they're providing content in the body of the email that's showing a snapshot of really, you know, a possible contract that could be, you know, that could enter into your system, you know, depending on if the organization gets approval for funding. And again, this contract request process, right, this can start after or before your sourcing process, right? So a lot of times, you know, there's a need in your organization to go ahead, and you've identified basically an opportunity to bottom line your spend a little bit. So, you know, you're going to go ahead and probably, you know, create a bid, RFP, or whatever eventually. And a lot of times there's something in your organization where you're starting a request for that bid, right? So we're going to talk about in a contract request record in Ariba how it can be set up to go straight to a contract workspace, which is a true contract record in your system, or actually you can even have it go from a contract request, collecting the data, getting approval, and then going into a sourcing project, then into a contract workspace if when you award the business, because then at that point you'd be drawing up a real contract. So again, in a nutshell, what a request is a collection of this information, like dates, notification, what type of deal it is, who the requester is, there's priority, sometimes there's a risk sort of analysis that goes on in this process. And then, you know, one of the key takeaways today, and a lot of customers don't realize this, but those of you that are on the line today, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with contract workspaces in the contract management system, you know, the contract request functionality is basically like 99% identical to a contract request. So whatever we can do functionality-wise in a workspace, we can basically do in a request. Okay, and we'll talk about then how does that make sense. It seems weird if it's the same functionality, but there's a purpose to a specific request versus a workspace, and we'll talk about that more. This is just, again, indicating that there's an overview tab, there's a task tab, there's a document tab, there's a team tab, and then it's got its own template. So just like a contract workspace, it has the same components. And again, this is just generally saying that a requester is trying to get this information and then get the right people on the team to collaborate on this project, and then basically get approval. And once you get approval, you know, you go further in the sourcing project, and you're either going to create an RFP or a bid or something, or you're going to just go ahead and create a contract because you may already have a supplier that you're going to award business to. So let me just, and again, I'm going to periodically check in here to the Q&A section just to see if I have any questions, and I don't at the moment. So I'm going to move forward. Okay, so let's take a look at this stuff in the actual solution. So you guys should be able to see my screen at this point as well. This is just a general sandbox test environment that we play around with, we meaning people on our team a lot. So it should look still very similar to your actual site, whether you have sourcing contracts or whatever you have with us. It looks like this, right? And this is just the home dashboard in this sandbox environment. Now, the first thing I want to kind of talk about is basically the separation between a contract request versus a contract workspace versus a sales workspace versus a sales request and all that sort of stuff. So those of you that are, again, know about workspaces in Ariba, you know that we have different partitions, right? So we have a sort of, we have like a little area, I guess you could call it, where you can store your procurement contracts, and an area where you could store your sales contracts, and an area where you can store your internal contracts. Those are just different partitions. Whether you're using those areas or not, they are available, okay? And those are permission driven. So if you see, I'm logged in a special way, but basically I have like all the permissions possible, okay? So if you see, if I like drop down the create menu here, for example, you can see I can create a contract workspace procurement, I can create a contract workspace sales, and I can create a contract workspace internal. Now I'm talking about workspaces at the moment. And again, I would not see the internal link or the sales link if I did not have those specific permissions too. And what permissions I'm talking about are, there's a couple different permissions that give you those links, but the basic one would be contract agent. Contract agent, and when I say permission, I'm talking about system groups. So when you create a user and you give them groups, if I gave a user contract agent, it would now give me the opportunity to have contract workspace procurement link under my create screen. As opposed to, or in addition, if I gave that same user the system group called sales contract agent. Sales contract agent is what I would need if I want to have the link for sales to be able to create sales contract workspaces. The reason I'm talking about this is because, as you can see here, I have separate links for requests. So again, and here's what I want to make a note, have you guys make a note of. All you have to give a user to be able to create contract requests is actually most of the system groups that you give a user will allow them to create a request. In other words, even the most primitive system group in the system, which is called internal user, which you guys probably mostly know of just giving that user kind of read-only capability to the system, where they can actually search and see contract workspaces, based on your access control, of course. They can also create contract requests. So if I jump over to this, the permissions matrix, which hopefully some of you are familiar with if you actually administrate users in the site, you can see here over here where it says in this column AI, it says create procurement contract requests. So all these X's, so literally all these permissions, any of these permissions would give a user the ability to create a contract request. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a permission specific to contracts, because again, you can have users in your source that are sourcing users that you want to be able to create a contract request. And the other main takeaway here is that you don't have to give a user a full user license to be able to create contract requests, right? So like my example, again, the most primitive permission in here, internal user, okay, which is going to be in the general section like right here, okay, it's only occupying a team member license, and it would give them the ability to create procurement contract requests, okay? Now, procurement contract requests, now there is a specific system group called sales sales contract request permission. So for sales, you have to give them a specific system group called sales contract requester. Okay, so that's how you would get those links to be able to create contract requests. I wanted to make sure I covered that. Again, those are what permissions you would need to create contract requests. And again, it's literally anything you give them basically will give them the ability to create a contract request. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to stop for a moment because I have a couple of questions. First question is there any specific language related to export control regulations? Is there any specific language related to export control regulations? I'm not really sure. If you could rephrase that, that question a little bit more specifically, maybe I can answer it better. I'm going to go on to the next one. When you get to the relevant request area, can you show how to delete a document? Yes, so I will show that. That's not a problem. So now let me jump into, again, you have separate, the whole point what I'm trying to make here in terms of separation of space is your contract request procurement, you have a separate screen, right? So it's a separate creation screen from your contract workspace procurement screen. It's a separate creation screen from your contract request sales screen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say create, and before I do that, I just want to note again, just as there's a separation in your create screens, there's a separation, of course, in your search screens. So I have, again, you know, what kind of project do you want to search for? You guys are probably familiar with your search engine by now. If I say contract request procurement, I have that versus contract request sales and so forth. And of course, contract request procurement versus contract workspace procurement. So it's a different type of project, basically, right? So if I jump into the search engine here, okay, when you're in the search engine for any type of project in Ariba, you know you always have this project type field, and you always want to check it. So I already picked contract request procurement, so that's what type of project I'd be searching for. So if I did a search with this metadata field now, I would not pull up any contract workspaces, right? Just requests and procurement requests at that. So again, separation. In fact, the last thing I want to talk about in terms of separation is in reporting. I'm not going to take you into the reporting today, but even in reporting, your fact tables, these have separate fact tables. Your request fact table is separate from your workspace fact table as well, okay? So I'm going to jump in here and go create contract workspace, create contract request procurement. Okay, and as you can see here, I've got a screen with a bunch of metadata fields. Now, it looks a heck of a lot like a contract workspace creation screen, right? So again, the main takeaway with that is you can technically have a different set of fields on your contract request screen versus your contract workspace screen. However, that would be, I would say, not typical, right? Typically, it's the same data you're collecting. Sometimes you're collecting a little less metadata on your request versus your workspace. But technically, again, they can be different. You can even have more fields on your request screen versus your workspace screen. So those are all configurable with Ariba, okay? The other thing to note is that if you've added any custom fields, you know, during your deployment for contract management or even after your deployment, all your fields should already be on your request, right? In other words, if you're not using the contract request now and you're just using contract workspaces, if you went to like contract request procurement and you're using contract workspace procurement, you should see all the same fields already, but they can be customized to be set different, is what I'm saying. So now, if I go and I'm going to fill this out, I'm going to call this test contract request, and I'm just going to date it today. All right, and I'm going to fill out at least some fields here. Okay, now another thing to note is at the bottom of my creation screen, just like a contract workspace creation screen, I have a list of templates, right? So you either have one template available to you or many or zero, I guess you could possibly have. My point is these are contract request templates, right? They're not your contract workspace templates. So you also have separate templates for your contract requests. So you, again, because, and you're going to see this in a second, a lot of times your process is going to be different in your request portion of your sourcing process than versus your contract workspace workflow, right? So I'm going to just choose a contract request template that I already have out there, and I'm going to say create. Okay. I'm going to ignore DFS for today. Okay, and again, as you see, very similar to a contract workspace. It looks exactly like a contract workspace. But as you can see here, it says it's a contract request, and it's a procurement type. Okay, that's how you know, just to make sure when you're on an actual project, you can identify it, what type it is. And again, just like a contract workspace, you'll see a lot of the same fields. These are these sort of what I always refer to as the Ariba filing cabinet fields, so your ID of the record, what the status is of this contract request, who's the owner, who clicked create just now, and then of course all the metadata that you're collecting for your contract request that we saw mostly on the creation screen, and then you have contract term attributes down here. Now, what I want to show you for a second is if I jump to your tasks tab, okay. Again, this would be the workflow that was coming from the contract request template. So I have a very simple workflow here. Like I just have a to-do task that says prepare the team tab. So I'm going to go over to the team tab and make sure there's someone in this team called contract request approver, because that's going to end up being my approver for the approval task. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark this complete. Now I'm going to go and, I have just a generic task here that says prepare request, and it's attached to a request form. So again, your request workflow could be whatever you want it to be, right? Just like your workspace templates, you can have to-do tasks, document tasks, review tasks, approval tasks. The sky's the limit. Notification tasks, all that same functionality is still doable in here. In fact, you can have even a supplier negotiation task. Okay, all that stuff is the same functionality as a workspace. Again, typically, I would say, 75% of the time, the request processes, from what I've seen, are usually smaller and not as complicated as a workspace workflow, but it's mainly to get your users in there to prepare the request. Again, you may not even have like an actual contract document at the point of your request. You can store your contract document, and I want to make sure I get to this person's question because they said, how would you delete something? So if I wanted to add, and let's just say I'm going to store my contract on my my actual request record. So let's see if I have a fake contract out here I can pull. All right, I'm going to just pull this Word file, okay? And I'm going to create it and upload it to my contract request documents tab, just like I would in a workspace, same way. And then once you upload it, if someone wanted to know how to delete it, I mean, literally you just click on it and you can say delete. Again, I don't know if the person that asked that question is having trouble deleting something. The only time you can't delete stuff, remember, is first of all, if you're not the owner, you cannot delete it. Second of all, obviously if the contract request or workspace or whatever it is published, you can't delete anything. And thirdly, if the document came from a template, you cannot delete it, right? So like this request form I had in the documents tab of my contract request template, so I can't delete it because I'm enforcing the user for it to be there. Okay, so let me just go here. There is someone typing in chat. And please don't type in chat in the future. As I said before, I need you to kind of post your questions in Q&A. But anyway, the question is, can a user manage negotiation tasks or a review task in a contract request? Do you need a user license to manage these tasks? And the answer to that is no. You do not need to be, you don't have to hold a full user license to be an owner of a negotiation task or a review task. And the answer to that is even true in a workspace, okay? You need to, or the only thing that would occupy a full user license as it relates to a project is, if you have project owner capabilities to a contract workspace. Okay, and let me go to the other questions I have in Q&A here. And I have a few more questions. If you upload a document to a contract request, does it follow along when you create the contract workspace? And the answer to that is no. I will show you how you do that sort of manually, but it doesn't automatically come over. The other question is there any access and permission to users related to award military contracts? So I'm a little bit confused by these questions. We don't have any sort of permissions that are related to some sort of specific commodity or service agreements, right? That's sort of all controlled by you guys and your configuration of the system. And then the other question is if the published document is outdated, how is it possible to remove the old one without using the replace option? Yeah, the thing is, so this must be the same person that was asking how do you delete a document. So the published document, I guess, is outdated. Yeah, the only way to do that is to, again, I'm thinking that either the problem is one of the three things I told you, that you're not the owner, or that it's, the problem is, yeah, once you publish, it's already in previous versions. So you can still get rid of it, though, if it's not a main agreement. That might be the other problem. If it's in a main agreement, it's not going to let you blow away that entire main agreement, especially, again, if it came from the template. But it sounds like that's probably a question for a different call or customer service at Ariba. So anyway, at this point, again, I've uploaded this document. I'm going to go to my contract request workflow, and I am going to mark this prepare request to do task complete. And again, now here I've got a simple approval. And this is very typical, right, to have an approval at the end of your contract request process. So you're just getting approval for the entire request. So we're saying, hey, yes, I'll approve this, which again usually means it allows them to create a contract off of the request or a sourcing project off of the request. So in this case, something to note is, again, in my Documents tab, I just have two documents. I have nothing else. I don't have a sub-project that will appear once I approve this, and I don't have another task after this approval. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this out for approval, and it's going to go to who's ever in the contract request approver group, which is on the team tab, which is one of my test users I put in there. So I'm going to say submit. And now if I go to, I'm going to go in and act as that test user so I can approve this request. Okay, so here is the request. I'm going to go ahead and click on that task and actually approve it. And now if I stop acting as this approver, and as you guys already know, this is not a webinar on task, but an email would have generated when you kick it out for approval to the approver. He or she would go into the system or approve by email if that's turned on in your system, and then or deny, of course. And then whatever the response is, approval or deny, the owner of the task, in this case me, would get notified again via email on what that response was. So now I can go back into the request and I can see that now it's been approved. Now I see a new task has appeared, so I've set this request template up so that there's a condition-based task that appears if this task gets approved. If it gets approved, there's a task now that says create contract workspace. And frankly, it's connected to a sub-project called contract workspace, which is living on the documents tab. If I go over here, and now I see it. Remember before it just had the two Word files? So now I can literally click on this and say open contract workspace, which is the sub-project. Or again, I could go to the documents tab and open that sub-project from there. It does the same thing. But if I say open, it brings me right to the creation screen of a contract workspace. And this, as you can see, the fields from the request are carrying over those values, right? Now, here's the thing. I want to stop and talk about that for a moment. So that's all configurable, right? So out of the box, our Ariba out-of-the-box fields are already set up behind the scenes to carry over the value from a request, I shouldn't say from a request to a workspace. It's actually a parent project to a sub-project. So I've set this up, again, so that my contract workspace is a sub-project of the contract request. And I'm going to show you a little bit of how that setup is in the template so you guys are clear on that. But just so you know and for your reference, you already have a template like that in your system that comes out of the box with your solution. So if you go into your Manage Template area and you see the one that says like Contract Request, that's a procurement contract request. If you look at that template, you will see that it has already a sub-project of a contract workspace embedded inside of it, and it's set up to do an approval task to approve, to make that sub-project appear and allow you to create the contract workspace off of the request. It's already set up like that, and I can show you that as well. But again, if you've added a lot of custom fields to your system, and you're finding that the parent project is not passing the value to the sub-project, in this case, again, a request to a workspace, you just have to call Ariba or log a service request and say, hey, I need the values for XYZ fields to come over from a parent project to a sub-project, and they can flag the fields to do that, okay? So I'm going to here choose an effective date. And then an expiration date. I see I'm still getting some questions in the chat. So again, try to please use the Q&A section and not the chat. But the question is, who can view and open the Create Workspace task? Only a contract owner with a user license, I guess. Correct. You would need a full user license to create a contract workspace, but that's actually a good question because if you try to set this up in your template and you don't know what you're doing, you would get possibly get a message that says you do not have permission to access this project when you go and create the contract workspace. And I'll tell you why that might be. It has to do with the setup in the template, and I'll show you that in a second. The other question is, do all the information flow from the request to the workspace documents as well? So I've already sort of answered that question. If there's out-of-the-box fields that are set up to do that, but if you have custom fields and it's not flagged to come over, you need to call Ariba and they can flag the information to come over. Documents will not come over from the request to the workspace. Once again, I want to note that for your procurement workspaces. If you're using sales contract requests and sales workspaces, I do know a trick to carry over the documents from a request to a workspace in your sales partition. And the way to do that is when you upload the document to the sales request, you need to label it as, there's a field on the document properties there that says use as, and you would set that field to be an order form, and it'll automatically bring over order forms. That's just a little trick, but only on sales workspaces. I have yet another question, which is, if there is on behalf of set of privileges another person may use for authority of owner or approver. That's correct. The only way to get that sort of permission that I'm using, like act as another person, is to have the most powerful permission in the system, which is called customer administrator, which only Ariba can grant you. And there's a sign-off process because once you have that permission, you sort of own your data because it's very dangerous because you can export and import a lot of information. But yes, that would allow you to also take the authority to, you know, do anything as that user, basically. Okay. So now that again, my information is carried over from my request to the workspace, I again am choosing my correct workspace template at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and just choose this repository template for a workspace, and I'm going to say create. And it's complaining because it has a field that is required for a value for the creation of this workspace. So I'll put that in. And so here's my workspace. Okay, so now, again, so here I could go through, this is a very small workflow, but you would go here through your normal contract workspace workflow that came from your workspace template now at this point, right? And as you can see here, the parent project is the request. So from the overview of the contract workspace now, I can always punch right back to the request by hitting this right here. And similarly, again, from the request to the workspace, if I go back to that sub-project on the Documents tab, I can click it and say Open, and it's going to pop me right back to that contract workspace I already have created. Okay? So again, your documents don't come over, but your field values can come over if they're configured to do so. And then, you know, a lot of times the process at this point would be to go ahead and close your request because it's been approved. So you could go into your request and you could go to the overview and actually click Actions Close and close your request because it's not an open request anymore. Okay? So that, again, is the basics of how you would sort of use a request. Now, I want to take you into the template to explain how this is set up. So I'm going to go into my Manage Templates area. Okay. So there's a lot of templates in this particular site. But I want to say, again, when you go into your Manage Templates area of your own site, if you're a contracts customer, you will see, again, under, let's see, we might have changed the name of the default folders, but you should have a folder that is called, unless you change the name of it too, but it's an out-of-the-box folder in your Manage Templates area that's called Contract Templates. And it literally will have a template in it, well, two of them. One will just be called Contract Workspace Template, very generic. And the other one, or I think it's just called Contract Workspace, actually. And the other one would be called a Contract Request. And again, it's already set up for you to do that. But I'm going to take you into mine specifically. But again, it's set up basically the same exact way as your out-of-the-box one. And again, you can create your own if you want as well. So I'm going to go in and find my template that I just demonstrated to you. Let's see, where is it? Okay, so I use this request template right here, so I'm going to go ahead and open that. Okay, so I'm going to create a new version of this template just so we can see edit screens if we need to. And just to show you how this is working, again, this is my contract request procurement template. On the Documents tab, here's my sub-project. So if you had a blank contract request template and you created a request template from scratch, all you would do on the Documents tab to get this is you would say Actions, and then you would say Create Sub-Project, and then you choose what type of sub-project it is. In this case, I chose Contract Workspace Procurement. But as I was saying before, you could have it be a sourcing project, for instance, okay? Or any of these other types of projects. So now, as you can see, if I go to the tasks, it was this approval task that triggered this Create Contract Workspace task to appear, as well as the sub-project to be able to be on the Documents tab, so giving the user the authority to go ahead and create the workspace from the request. So if I edit this approval task, I want to show you what's going on here. So in the approval task, the thing is here is, sorry. Okay, this one's actually not being done from the approval task, so hold on. Okay. Okay, so what's going on is this. The condition is applied to the actual sub-project. So I've got a condition over here that basically is saying, hey, when this field called process status equals the value of approved, then, you know, this condition is satisfied. So, and that's applied to this subproject. So this subproject will not appear until the process status field equals approved. Well, when does the process status field equal approved? And process status is an out-of-the-box Ariba field that you guys have if you're not using it already. It allows you to, if you're in a task of a request or in tasks of your workspace in the template, you can go into that task, edit it, or you can do this when you're creating the task, and you'll see there's a field setting field here in the task, and you can say, you know, right now, out of the box, you're only going to have a field called process status, but literally you can have in Ariba flag any field you want to act as the same way, but it's a flag behind the field that's called template field setter, and it allows the field to be available in this list. And if I say, for instance, I want to use deal status, it says, hey, here are your choices. When this task is completed in the workflow, I want it to represent the value of approval, for instance, or executing, or authoring, or whatever it be. And then you can set conditions based upon that value. So when the task is complete, boom, that field represents that value and the condition is satisfied. That's how even your out-of-the-box request template is set up, where when the approval task is completed, boom, that condition is triggered so that the subproject appears. Okay, so that's what's similarly going on here. This condition is just basically inherited because it's connected to a subproject called Contract Workspace, and the Contract Workspace subproject lives on the Documents tab, and that has a condition, right? So it's saying, hey, this task is connected to the subproject, so I can't even have the task appear if the document that it's attached to is not there, which is the subproject, and the subproject does not appear until that condition is satisfied. So that's kind of how it's working. Let me check the Q&A section here, so I think we have some more questions. It says, who can close a request? Which role do you have to have in the team tab to do so? All right, so the owner can close the request, obviously, but basically anyone that has access to the request should be, actually, I take that back. You have to have some owner capability to the request to close the request, otherwise you won't have the permissions to do so. So again, you would have to be the owner of the request to close it, or have additional people in the project owner group on the team tab of the request to be able to close the request. Or you can create, of course, additional project groups on the team tab of the request and associate the role project owner or contract administrator to that project group and the people that you put in there, and become owners of that request as well, and therefore they can close it. Okay, let me just kind of check my PowerPoint and make sure I covered what I wanted to cover on this topic. Okay, we talked about, so again, I didn't actually point on this too much. Why you would use a request. So most organizations that use a request use it because they have a large user base, and they have a lot of people that they don't want to give authority to creating actual contract records in the system, which would be contract workspaces, but they have a lot of users that they are giving authority to create a contract request, right? So you have sort of a funnel. So you have, let's say, just hypothetically, 100 users, contract users of your system, and you only have 10 full contract user licenses. So those 10 people are creating contract workspaces, but 90 of them are allowed to create contract requests. And then you have maybe, you know, a couple people that are able to approve the request, giving authority to the 10 contract creators to create the contract workspace. Another thing, you know, so it allows more people to sort of, you know, it gets rid of duplicate entry. So again, you know, you can have a lot more users plugging in metadata as it pertains to a potential contract. And then, your contract creators don't have to enter all that data again because it'll carry over from the request to the workspace or the request to the sourcing project and workspace. So that's really the use case of a request. And it allows you to, track, how many requests or potential contracts did we have here. It's a logging into your repository system to give you more insight on that and how many graduated to actual be contracts that you ended up, doing business with. So that would be, the purpose of a contract request in the system. And one other thing that I didn't note is a lot of times, guys, you can have a lot of times I see for instance, the project owner, this is the contract request template, by the way. The project owner is typically the owner of most tasks in the request up until after the approval task. In other words, obviously, if I'm let's just say I've got, Joe Schmo only has a team member license for contracts, the contract environment, and he creates contract requests. Okay, then it shoots to approval to Brian. Once Brian approves it via this approval task, it's a lot of times the owner is someone different than the project owner of the request, right? Because that would only make sense because, you need to have a licensed user be the person that's actually creating the workspace, right? So in this case, if this was someone else or another, group of people, you can set it up so that this approval task prior is, let me edit it and show you, is a predecessor task to the contract workspace task. And when you do that, so if I say, actually I'm going to do it the other way around. If I say this create contract workspace task, there's a prerequisite here, there's a predecessor task. If I go in and edit this task and I say the predecessor task is going to be the previous task, which is the approval right here. What will happen is then the owner of this pre-contract workspace task will get a notification saying, hey, the predecessor task has been complete. In other words, the approval task has been approved. You can go ahead and create your contract workspace off of the request. So that's very typical. Okay, we've got another question. In fact, I've got two more questions. It says, our contract request does not have a sub-project contract workspace. We instruct the request approver to go to the overview and create a follow-on project. Is this okay, I guess is what they're asking. So that is totally fine. That's another way of doing it. So the only difference is when you use a contract request as a predecessor project to a follow-on project being the contract workspace, that's just a flat line relationship between projects. So you still have a connection between your request and your workspace, but it's a flat line. There's not a hierarchy. So to be honest, what it's not as, what it's not as good for is reporting. Because in reporting, when you do a multi-fact reporting, you can have the first main fact be the child project. So in this case, the contract workspace. And then you'll see when you drop down the second fact table list, you can have, it'll say contract request parent. So if you're and again, from your searching functions too, you're able to see more, your parent and child project relationships, which I think is more effective. But it's not wrong the way you're doing it as a predecessor project to a follow-on project. But I prefer, and the typical best practice is a parent project to a child project. And then the other question is, can you define conditions on who is going to be a contract request approver for commodity? Example, for commodity, it would go to one person, but for commodity Y, it would go to another person. Yes. So those kind of program who it goes to for what approvers, that would be, you would want to use the team member rules file. I don't really have time to get into that, but you can look that up in the help documentation, the team member rules file. It's basically, you can go into your team tab here of your contract workspace or request, and if you go on the Actions button here and say Download Template under Team Member Rules, it's an Excel file that allows you to build rules. And there's 4 worksheets in there. The first one is actually all instructional, so it'll walk you through how to build the rules. And then basically you upload that file as a Team Member Rules file on the Documents tab right here. And then those rules will fire, which will populate members into your teams on your Team tab, which can be, again, linked to who the approvers are on an approval task, for instance. So that's how you would accomplish that. Okay. Back to my PowerPoint again here. Okay, we've talked about that, and we talked about what permissions. So I've sort of covered what I want to cover in terms of the actual contract works request functionality and why you use it, what permissions you need, you know, and how it works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my wrap-up slides, and then if, you know, during this time that I'm wrapping up, if you guys have more questions, go ahead and post them in Q&A, and I'll stick around to answer them as well. Okay, so after this webinar is over, you'll be prompted to answer a multiple choice survey, 10-question survey. Please go ahead and just take the few minutes it takes to answer that, because it helps us with your feedback so we can continue to make this offering a good offering for you. This is just mentioning about BPC and our company. I mentioned in the beginning of the call that I work for the Best Practice Center at Ariba, and that's a department that basically is remote consultants. And again, traditionally we've been just subscription service to our customers. So in other words, customers have to pay subscription or purchase hours with us, and those hours can be used, you know, however they like with us. So we work with them via WebEx sessions and calls, never on site or anything like that. But basically, our whole main goal is driving adoption, right? So we bring a lot of product expertise, very deep solution knowledge, as well as a lot of various industry knowledge that we've acquired in terms of what's the best practice, what works, what doesn't work with our solution. And we try to make you hit your sort of strategic goals and get you through any pain points and coach you through that. And we want to empower you as the user, right? So we're not trying to just do stuff for you and say, hey, I created a template for you in your system, go check it out and go for it. But rather, you know, make you learn how to be self-sufficient with your solution. And so, you know, this is just an offering we do, webinar for free. But again, if you're interested in our services, just reach out to your, you know, your account manager, your CEE, and they can inform you of how you could purchase our services if you're interested in something like that. Subscribers to BPC also get access to advanced webinar recordings that we sort of record offline, and then you guys can access that, but it's a private section where only subscribers can access. So I already talked about that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today in terms of the topic today, but I see I have another question, so let me just see if I can answer that. Okay. Oh, okay, let's see. It is, how do we become contract ninjas with knowledge like you? That's a funny one. I've never heard that before, but thanks. I'll take that as a compliment. I don't know how to explain that, but basically the way it is, you know how it is, guys. You got to get in there and get your feet wet, and you got to get your hands dirty, not be afraid to break things and play around. So when I say don't be afraid to break things, my suggestion would be go into your test site. Everyone has a test site. It takes a little time to get in there, and you know, also read the help documentation. We've got all the documentation up there online, right? So if you're in the Ariba solution and you go to the help menu in the upper right hand corner, you have product documentation here. You know, you can search through the documentation here and you can find the right guides, and that can help you a lot, right? And then go ahead and try it. Be in your test site, fiddle around, don't be afraid, and that's kind of how you learn. I mean, the only way to learn is, you know, actually getting your hands dirty. It's not just listening to me talk and watching videos, right? You guys know how it is. That's how it is with a lot of things in life. So you know, I mean, my knowledge came from, you know, being at the company for a long time and doing this stuff for a long time, right, and being in the software every day. So can you show us how to manage the document from the request to the contract workspace? Yes, thanks for reminding me. I did say I was going to mention that. So let me jump back here to our projects from today. Okay. So if I go here, here is my contract request. And if I go just to show you, let's say I want these documents to come over to my contract workspace. So I literally have to click on the document and say copy. And then I can find where do I want to copy this to, like what project. And as you can see, it does make it easy when it's set up this way as a parent-child relationship again, because my contract workspace is right here, literally. So I can go ahead and say within the contract workspace, I want it to go in the contract documents folder. Boom, like that. Say OK. And now if I say done, this is my contract workspace. By the way, as you notice, I didn't really give it a specific name. I left it contract workspace by default, so it's very generic. But you know, as you can see, if I go to the Documents tab and I'm in my contract documents folder here, there's the document I brought over from my request. So it's pretty easy. It's just that if you have a lot of documents, you have to do it for everyone. The next question I have is, can you show again how you acted as another user on behalf? I think I have authority, but never knew I could do this. Yeah, so if you, again, the only way to get the ability to do that is to ask Ariba to grant you and sign off for granting you the system group called Customer Administrator. You user admins, you don't even have visibility to it, so you can't assign it to yourself, so Ariba has to do it. But if you have Customer Administrator, when you go into Manage Administration and then you go into your User Manager, you know, the same place where you go to search for users or create users, you would just search for the person you want to act as. And then your search results of your users here, if I want to act as this person, I just go over to the right-hand side on the Actions button, and now you'll have an Act As option if you have the Customer Administrator system group. The last question, or a couple more questions I have, would the RFI RFP process be applicable to using a contract request? Absolutely. You know, again, you know, my particular demonstration today was you know, having the child project be a workspace, but as I said, it can be any type of sourcing event. So a lot of times, so for instance, you know, if you guys are using sourcing full projects, sometimes you're going to have in there, you know, a potential RFI, RFP, auction, whatever, and those are maybe different phases in your sourcing full project process. So the first thing that usually happens in that case, again, is your contract request can be the first, you know, point of where you're going into the system to start requesting a contract or some sort of bid, and then that would, you know, your child project would be that sourcing project. And then within your sourcing project, you would have, let's say, you know, one of the final stages after you award in the sourcing solution would be a, you know, a contract workspace. So you would actually create your contract workspace from your sourcing project in that case. I think that's what you're asking. Hopefully that answers your question. More questions yet? Where could one find the test site? So if you know, so I don't, you know, if all of your sites have a name. I don't know if you guys are using the long, weird string that looks maybe something like this in your URL as your production site, but typically you all, let's just say like Ariba, maybe the site name is like for Ariba. If Ariba was a customer of let's say SAP, for instance, and my site at Ariba would be whatever I created it. So I don't know what your site name is, but if you know the production name site, it's basically the same thing with a -t before the .sourcing.ariba.com. So in other words, Ariba would be, if, for example, if my site name was Ariba, it would be Ariba.sourcing, I'm sorry, Ariba. Hold on a second. Ariba. Let me give you an example here. Hold on. It's easier to show you. But it's basically the same name as your production site with a -T before the first period. So if you're having trouble with that, just go ahead and log a service request or call support. They'll tell you what the test site name is. But again, everyone's test site name is different, so that's why I can't really help you offhand. Next question is, can you use a contract request to request an amendment to an existing published contract? That's an interesting question, or contract termination. So, I'm trying to think if that would make any sense. Let's see. So you have an existing contract workspace published out there. You have a need for amendments. You start filling out the contract workspace. I'm sorry, contract request to request. Yeah, I mean, I don't see why you couldn't do that. You could certainly employ the contract request process for requesting an amendment. The only thing is, you know, customers amend in various different ways. Some do what I call the Ariba way, like amending the entire contract workspace. So, in other words, in that scenario, if you had a request that's requesting an amendment for an existing contract in your system, I guess at the end of the request, you know, you're not going to, like, if you're doing the sub-agreement method, then you could go ahead and create a contract request, and it could be a new contract workspace, and then you could associate that as a sub-project under your master agreement, which is your original contract workspace. But if you're doing, again, amendments the Ariba way, and you're amending the workspace, then I guess you could just have like a standalone request, and it doesn't have to have a child, and then once that request gets approved, you can go ahead and amend the workspace. Sure. I don't see why that would be a problem. That was the last question I have at this moment. So I'm going to probably sign off here. And thanks for being so interactive today. That was a lot of questions today, and I'm glad that means you guys are engaged and listening and you actually care about this content and are curious. So the other thing I want to note is, before we used to post these recordings on our Ariba Exchange site. We're losing our Ariba Exchange site because of some of the changes with the SAP acquisition. So, but we're, you know, we get a lot, where do we go to find the recordings for these? And basically, you know, most customers don't even realize this, but you know where you went to actually register for this webinar? That same link that you go to register for future webinars, if you look down on the screen, it's on the same screen. There's all the previous recordings from these webinar series. So why don't you go ahead and check that out, and I'm going to officially sign off. Thanks for joining today's What is a Contract Workspace webinar, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys for future webinars soon. Thanks again. Have a great day.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be